The acrid sting of smoke filled Willa Knightley's lungs as she desperately searched for an escape from the rapidly engulfing cabin. It was supposed to be a fresh start in Del Rio, Texas, not a fiery end to her dreams before they'd properly begun. Summer 1875 had brought nothing but hardship since Willa arrived from Boston. At 22, she'd imagined the western frontier would offer opportunity after her parents' passing left her with little but determination and the deed to a small property at the edge of town. Instead, she found a dilapidated cabin that required more repair than she could afford, and a community that viewed an unmarried woman living alone with suspicion. Flames licked up the wooden walls of her modest home, the fire having spread with terrifying speed from the small cooking stove where a pot of stew had bubbled only minutes before. Something had caught perhaps a stray ember or a faulty chimney, and now orange tongues of destruction devoured everything she owned. "Help!" Willa screamed, though she knew it was futile. Her nearest neighbor was over a mile away, and the roar of the fire would swallow her cries. Smoke burned her eyes and throat as she stumbled toward the door, only to find it jammed. The summer heat had warped the wood, and now, when escape mattered most, it refused to budge. Panic seized her as she pushed with all her might, shoulder aching from the effort. The air grew thinner with each passing second. Her simple blue cotton dress offered no protection from the heat closing in around her, and she could feel her consciousness slipping away. Outside, Wade Quinnell urged his horse faster along the dusty trail. He'd been returning to his ranch after delivering cattle to Del Rio when he spotted the plume of smoke rising in the distance. As foreman of the Silverhawk Ranch, Wade had seen his share of disasters, but something pulled him toward this one with unusual urgency. At 30, Wade had earned a reputation as one of the most capable men in the county. His tall frame and broad shoulders spoke of physical strength, while the quiet intelligence in his hazel eyes revealed a thoughtful mind. Life had taught him to keep people at a distance, but it had never diminished his instinct to help those in need. As he approached the burning cabin, Wade saw no one outside. The building was small but solid, or had been, before the fire began consuming it. He dismounted from his chestnut stallion in a fluid motion born of years in the saddle, quickly tethering the horse to a safe distance from the blaze. "Anyone inside?" he called out, rushing toward the structure. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of movement. Someone was in there. Without hesitation, Wade charged the door, his shoulder connecting with the wood. Once, twice, on the third attempt, the door splintered beneath his boot, and he pushed through into a world of heat and choking smoke. There, collapsed on the floor just feet from the door, was a young woman. Her face was smudged with soot, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, but even in that moment of danger, Wade noticed her delicate features. "I've got you," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. Scooping her into his arms, Wade turned back toward the door, shielding her body with his own as burning debris began to fall around them. The journey through the smoke-filled cabin seemed to stretch into eternity, but at last, they burst into the open air. Wade didn't stop until they were a safe distance away, gently laying Willa on a patch of grass beneath a cottonwood tree. "Miss, can you hear me?" He patted her cheek gently, worry creasing his brow as he searched for signs of life. Willa's eyes fluttered open and she gasped, drawing in clean air with desperate relief. "The cabin," she managed to say, her voice raw from smoke. "Nothing to be done for it now," Wade replied, glancing back at the structure now fully engulfed in flames. "What matters is you're alive." Tears filled Willa's eyes as the reality of her situation sank in. Everything she owned in the world was disappearing before her eyes. "I don't even know who to thank," she whispered, looking up at the tall stranger whose strong arms had carried her to safety. "Wade Quinnell, madam. Foreman at Silverhawk Ranch." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "And you are Willa Knightley." She attempted to sit up, and Wade quickly supported her back. "I only arrived in Del Rio 3 weeks ago, that cabin." Her voice broke. "That was all I had." Wade's expression softened. "Well, Miss Knightley, seems to me you've got a lot more than that. You've got your life, for one thing." A sudden crash drew their attention back to the cabin as the roof collapsed inward, sending a shower of sparks into the late afternoon sky. Willa flinched at the sound, and Wade instinctively moved closer, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Is there someone I can take you to? Family in town?" he asked. Willa shook her head, wiping a smudge of soot from her cheek. "No, I'm alone here. I came west after my parents died, hoping to make a new start." Wade considered this for a moment, his gaze moving from the burning cabin to the woman beside him. He couldn't leave her here with nothing, and nightfall was approaching. "Miss Knightley, I propose a solution if you'll consider it. Silverhawk has a small guest house where the owner's sister stays when she visits. It's vacant now and would give you shelter while you decide what to do next." Willa looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of dishonesty. All she found was genuine concern in those hazel eyes. Still, she hesitated. She barely knew this man, and accepting such help went against everything proper society had taught her. "I couldn't impose," she began, but a fit of coughing interrupted her words. Wade handed her his canteen. "Drink this, and it's no imposition. What kind of man would I be if I left you out here with night coming on and nowhere to go?" As Willa sipped the water, she realized she had little choice. Her savings were meager, certainly not enough to rebuild or find proper lodging in town. And something in Wade Quinnell's straightforward manner inspired trust. "Thank you," she said finally. "I accept your offer, at least until I can make other arrangements." Wade nodded, satisfied. "Can you ride? My horse is strong enough to carry us both back to the ranch." "I can," Willa confirmed, though she hadn't been on horseback in years. Wade helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. The effects of the smoke and shock were still with her, making her limbs feel unusually heavy. "If you'll permit me," Wade said, gesturing toward his waiting horse. When Willa nodded, he lifted her easily onto the saddle before mounting behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a secure circle that, despite her circumstances, made Willa feel safer than she had in months. As they rode away, Willa couldn't help looking back at the smoldering remains of what was supposed to be her fresh start. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she was alive to see it thanks to the cowboy whose solid presence at her back felt strangely like the first piece of good fortune she'd had since arriving in Texas. Neither of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine from that moment forward, or how a rescue from flames would kindle something neither had been looking for. The Silverhawk Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of Texas landscape, its main house rising from the prairie like a testament to hard work and prosperity. As Wade guided his horse through the large wooden gates, Willa took in her surroundings with wide eyes. Compared to her humble cabin, this place was practically an empire. "Mr. Quinnell, this is far grander than I expected," she admitted, her voice still rough from the smoke. "Call me Wade," he replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "And it's not mine, I just work here. Frederick Jameson owns Silverhawk. He spends most of his time in Austin these days, leaving me to manage things." They approached the stables, where a young stable hand rushed forward to take the reins as Wade dismounted. With gentle hands, he helped Willa down, noticing her wince as her feet touched the ground. "You're hurt," he observed, his brow furrowing with concern. "Just some bruises, I think," Willa assured him, though in truth, every muscle in her body ached from the ordeal. Wade turned to the stable boy, a freckle-faced youth of about 16. "Tommy, let Mrs. Caldwell know we have a guest who needs attention. Miss Knightley's cabin burned down today." "Right away, Mr. Quinnell," Tommy nodded, darting off toward the main house. "Mrs. Caldwell is our housekeeper," Wade explained to Willa. "She runs this place with an iron fist, but she's got the kindest heart in Texas." He offered his arm, which Willa accepted gratefully. As they walked toward a smaller building set a short distance from the main house, Willa was acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance. Her dress was soot-stained and torn in places, her hair a disheveled mess, and she likely smelled of smoke and fear. "The guest house hasn't been used in a few months," Wade said as they approached, "but it's kept ready. Mrs. Caldwell sees to that." The guest house was a charming cottage with a small porch and blue shutters on the windows. It wasn't large, but compared to Willa's lost cabin, it seemed luxurious. Before they reached the door, a plump woman in her 50s bustled toward them, her gray-streaked hair neatly tucked beneath a white cap, her expression a mixture of concern and efficiency. "Merciful heavens!" she exclaimed, taking in Willa's appearance. "Tommy told me what happened." "You poor dear, you must be in shock. Mrs. Caldwell, this is Miss Willa Knightley," Wade introduced them. "Miss Knightley, this is Mrs. Martha Caldwell, the backbone of Silverhawk." Mrs. Caldwell waved away the introduction. "We can handle pleasantries later. This young lady needs a bath, clean clothes, and a hot meal in that order." She took Willa's arm from Wade. "I'll take care of her from here, Mr. Quinnell," Wade nodded, recognizing when to step back. "I'll check on you later, Miss Knightley. You're in good hands." As Mrs. Caldwell led her toward the guest house, Willa glanced back at Wade, who stood watching them with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," she called. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." A small smile touched his lips. "No repayment necessary, Miss Knightley. Just get some rest." Inside the guest house, Willa discovered a cozy sitting room with comfortable furniture, a small kitchen, and a bedroom with the softest-looking bed she'd seen since leaving Boston. Mrs. Caldwell moved with practiced efficiency, sending for hot water for a bath and disappearing briefly to fetch clean clothes. "These belong to Mr. Jameson's sister," she explained upon returning with a simple but well-made blue dress and necessary undergarments. "She's a bit taller than you, but we can make adjustments." "I couldn't possibly," Willa began. "Nonsense," Mrs. Caldwell interrupted firmly. "Elizabeth Jameson has more dresses than sense and hasn't visited in over a year. She won't miss this one, and you need it more than her wardrobe trunk does." The practicality of this argument silenced Willa's protests. Soon she was soaking in a copper tub, the warm water washing away soot and easing her aching muscles. As she scrubbed her skin clean, the reality of the day's events hit her fully. Tears slipped down her cheeks, mixing with the bathwater. Everything she'd brought from Boston, her mother's locket, her father's pocket watch, the family Bible with generations of names recorded inside, all gone. The modest savings she'd hidden beneath a floorboard, gone. The few pieces of furniture she'd purchased in Del Rio, gone. She was alive, yes, but what kind of life could she build from absolutely nothing? By the time she dressed in the borrowed clothes, Willa had composed herself. Self-pity wouldn't rebuild her life. Only determination would do that. She emerged from the bedroom to find Mrs. Caldwell setting a tray of food on the small table. "Eat," the housekeeper instructed. "Then sleep. Tomorrow is time enough to worry about what comes next." Willa smiled gratefully. "You're very kind, Mrs. Caldwell. I don't know what I would have done if Mr. Quinnell hadn't come along when he did." Mrs. Caldwell's expression softened. "Wade's a good man, Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always the first to help when trouble comes." She patted Willa's hand. "Now eat before it gets cold." After Mrs. Caldwell departed, Willa ate the simple but delicious meal of beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie. Her body, exhausted from the day's trauma, demanded rest, and she barely made it to the bed before sleep claimed her. She woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains, momentarily confused by her surroundings until memory flooded back. Sitting up slowly, she noticed someone had left a pitcher of water and a basin on the dresser, along with a hairbrush and a small mirror. Willa performed her morning ablutions as best she could, using the brush to tame her dark hair into a simple braid. The borrowed dress fit well enough, though it was indeed a bit long. She had just finished pinning up her hem when a knock came at the door. Opening it revealed Wade Quinnell, hat in hand, looking far more rested than she felt. He wore a clean shirt and denim pants, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Good morning, Miss Knightley. I hope you slept well." His eyes took in her appearance, approval evident in his gaze. "As well as could be expected, thank you," Willa replied. "Please come in." Wade stepped inside but remained near the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "I rode into town at first light to inform the sheriff about your cabin. He'll make note of it, though there's little to be done now." "I appreciate that," Willa said, clasping her hands together to hide their trembling. "I should go into town myself today to figure out what happens next." Wade nodded. "I thought you might say that. I've asked Tommy to prepare the buggy. I can take you after breakfast if you'd like." Willa's pride wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own, but practicality won out. "That would be very helpful, thank you. Mrs. Caldwell is expecting you for breakfast at the main house," Wade added. "She's quite determined to see you properly fed." This brought a small smile to Willa's lips. "I'm beginning to think Mrs. Caldwell is a force of nature." "You have no idea," Wade chuckled, and Willa was struck by how the sound transformed his serious face. "She's been running this ranch longer than I've been alive, through 3 different owners." They walked together to the main house, where Mrs. Caldwell presided over a kitchen filled with delicious smells. 2 ranch hands were just finishing their breakfast, nodding respectfully to Wade and tipping their hats to Willa before heading out to their day's work. Sit, Mrs. Caldwell insisted, placing heaping plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before them. "Miss Knightley needs her strength, and you, Mr. Quinnell, are too lean by half." Breakfast passed with easy conversation, Mrs. Caldwell filling the silence with tales of Silverhawk's history and gentle inquiries about Willa's background. Wade said little, but Willa noticed how he listened attentively to her answers. "My father was a bookkeeper in Boston," she explained. "When he and my mother both died of influenza last year, I inherited very little except the deed to that cabin. An uncle of my father's had purchased it years ago but never lived there. I thought it might be a chance to start fresh. And so it still may be," Mrs. Caldwell said firmly. "Just not in that particular cabin." After breakfast, Wade excused himself to prepare the buggy while Mrs. Caldwell pressed a small pouch into Willa's hands. "Emergency funds," she explained in a whisper. "Don't you dare refuse. It's not charity, it's what decent folks do for one another." Willa's eyes welled with tears. "I'll pay it back," she promised. "Of course you will," Mrs. Caldwell agreed, though her tone suggested she considered such concerns trivial. The journey into Del Rio took almost an hour, during which Willa and Wade spoke little. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but rather the quiet of 2 people comfortable enough not to fill every moment with words. Del Rio was growing rapidly in 1875, its position near the Mexican border making it a hub for trade. The main street bustled with activity as Wade helped Willa down from the buggy in front of the sheriff's office. "Sheriff Patterson is a fair man," Wade told her as they entered. "He'll help however he can." The sheriff, a graying man with an impressive mustache, listened sympathetically to Willa's account of the fire. "Terrible business, Miss Knightley. We've had a dry summer. Fires can spread mighty quick. You're staying at Silverhawk now." He glanced at Wade with raised eyebrows. "In the guest house," Wade clarified firmly. "Temporarily." "Well, I'll make a formal report," Sheriff Patterson said, jotting notes in his ledger. "Not that it changes much for you, Miss Knightley. That land's still yours, though there's nothing left on it worth salvaging from what Wade here tells me." Willa nodded, her throat tight. "I'll need to find work, I suppose, and eventually rebuild if I can." The sheriff scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Might want to talk to Mrs. Sullivan at the Mercantile. Heard she's looking for help since her daughter got married and moved to San Antonio." Wade accompanied Willa to Sullivan's Mercantile, a large store that served as Del Rio's main supplier of goods. Inside, they found Mrs. Sullivan, a brisk woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes and a ready smile. "Of course I heard about the fire," she said after introductions were made. "News travels fast in Del Rio, and yes, I am looking for help." She assessed Willa with a calculating gaze. "Can you keep accounts?" "My Leela always handled the books." "My father was a bookkeeper," Willa replied. "He taught me everything he knew." Mrs. Sullivan's face brightened. "Well now, that's providential. When can you start?" The question took Willa by surprise. As soon as you need me, I suppose." "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp," Mrs. Sullivan decided. "We'll discuss wages then, but I promise fair compensation and you can take a room upstairs if you need it." As they left the Mercantile, Willa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had prospects now, a job and potential lodging. It wasn't what she'd planned when coming to Texas, but it was a beginning. "That was fortunate," Wade commented as they walked down the boardwalk. "Mrs. Sullivan drives a hard bargain, but she's honest." "I can't believe how quickly things are falling into place," Willa admitted. "Yesterday I thought all was lost." Wade stopped, turning to face her. "Miss Knightley, I've found that life has a way of opening new doors when old ones close, sometimes violently." His eyes held hers. "You've got grit coming out west on your own. That'll serve you well here." Something in his earnest assessment made Willa's cheeks warm. "Thank you for saying so. And please, after all you've done, I think you should call me Willa." A smile touched the corners of Wade's mouth. "Willa, then." They continued their business in town, stopping at the bank where Willa explained her situation. The banker was sympathetic but unhelpful regarding loans for rebuilding. A single woman with no collateral was not considered a good risk. As they prepared to return to Silverhawk in the late afternoon, Willa insisted on visiting her property first. Wade hesitated but agreed, steering the buggy down the familiar road that now led to ruins. The sight was worse than Willa had imagined. Nothing remained of her small home but a blackened foundation and charred timber. The chimney stood alone like a monument to what had been lost. Wade remained silent beside her, allowing her this moment of grief. Willa stepped down from the buggy and walked carefully through the ashes, searching for anything that might have survived. Near where her bed had stood, she spotted something glinting in the sunlight. Kneeling, she carefully extracted her mother's silver hairbrush from the debris. The handle was blackened and the bristles gone, but the silver back with its engraved initials remained intact. "It was her favorite," Willa said softly as Wade approached. "She used to brush my hair with it every night when I was small." Wade's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder. "Something to build on," he said quietly. Willa clutched the damaged brush to her chest, tears threatening again. But as she looked around at the devastation, she felt a strange sense of acceptance begin to form. This chapter was ended, but another was beginning. "I'm ready to go now," she said, rising to her feet. As they drove back to Silverhawk, the setting sun painted the landscape in gold and amber. Wade glanced at Willa's profile, noting the determination that had replaced the shock of yesterday. "You know," he said, breaking their companionable silence, "you're welcome to stay at Silverhawk until you're settled. The guest house sits empty most of the time anyway." Willa considered this. Mrs. Sullivan's offer of a room above the store was practical, but the thought of returning to Silverhawk's peaceful setting each evening held undeniable appeal. "I wouldn't want to impose for too long," she said carefully. Wade's hands were steady on the reins. "It's no imposition. And Del Rio's growing fast. The stagecoach makes the trip to town regular now. You could easily commute to the Mercantile." Willa studied him, curious about his motivation. "Why are you being so kind to me, Mr. Quinnell? You don't know me at all." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Wade," he reminded her, "and I know enough. I know you had the courage to start over when life dealt you a harsh hand. I know you didn't fall apart when your home burned down. That tells me a lot about your character." His simple assessment touched something in Willa. "Then I accept your offer, Wade, at least until I can save enough to consider other options." As Silverhawk came into view, its buildings golden in the sunset light, Willa realized she felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in Texas Hope. Perhaps her fresh start hadn't gone up in flames after all, but merely taken an unexpected turn. And perhaps the tall, quiet man beside her would play a larger role in her new beginning than either of them could yet imagine. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that brought unexpected contentment to Willa's life. Each morning, Wade would drive her to town in the buggy, dropping her at Sullivan's Mercantile before attending to ranch business. In the evenings, he would reappear, timing his own errands in Del Rio to coincide with the end of her workday. Mrs. Sullivan proved to be a fair employer, impressed by Willa's quick mind and organizational skills. The store's accounting books, which had fallen into disarray since Leela's departure, were soon meticulously ordered. Beyond numbers, Willa learned the business of the Mercantile, which customers paid promptly, which required gentle reminders, and which items sold best in different seasons. "You're a natural at commerce," Mrs. Sullivan declared one afternoon in late July as they unpacked a shipment of fabric. "Better than Leela ever was, though don't tell her I said so." Willa smiled, appreciating the compliment. "I enjoy the work. It's satisfying to see everything in its proper place." "Speaking of proper places," Mrs. Sullivan said, her tone turning conspiratorial, "I've noticed Wade Quinnell has been mighty punctual about picking you up these past weeks. Man's got a reputation for keeping to himself, yet there he is, regular as clockwork." Heat rushed to Willa's cheeks. "He's simply being kind. Silverhawk is on his way home," Mrs. Sullivan snorted. "Silverhawk is 6 miles in the opposite direction from his own cabin, girl. Nothing on the way about it." This information startled Willa. "His cabin? I thought he lived at the ranch." "He's got quarters there for when work runs late, but Wade built himself a place on a parcel of land he bought 3 years back. Keeps horses there. Man values his privacy." She gave Willa a knowing look, which makes his daily detours all the more interesting. Willa busied herself with arranging spools of thread, hoping to hide her confusion. Why hadn't Wade mentioned this? And why would he go out of his way twice daily just to transport her? That evening, as they drove back to Silverhawk, Willa gathered her courage. "Mrs. Sullivan mentioned you have your own place. I had no idea I was taking you so far out of your way each day." Wade's hands tightened slightly on the reins, but his expression remained neutral. "It's no hardship." "But it must add hours to your day," Willa persisted. He glanced at her, then returned his gaze to the road. "I don't mind the company," he said simply. The admission, understated as it was, sent a flutter through Willa's chest. Their daily journeys had indeed grown increasingly companionable. Wade, she had discovered, was a man of few words but deep thoughts. When he did speak, it was with consideration and often surprising insight. "Still, I can't help feeling I've imposed on you far too much already," she said. Wade was quiet for so long that Willa thought he might not respond. "Finally," he said, "before you came to Silverhawk, I spent most days speaking only to horses and ranch hands. My evenings were silent except for coyotes. These past weeks have been pleasant." The words seemed inadequate for what Willa saw in his eyes when he briefly met her gaze, a warmth that made her breath catch. "They have been pleasant for me as well," she admitted softly. August arrived with blistering heat, the sun beating down mercilessly on the Texas landscape. Despite the discomfort, Willa found herself thriving. Her work at the mercantile had earned her enough to start a modest savings, and Mrs. Caldwell's emergency funds remained untouched, ready to be returned. One scorching Sunday afternoon, Wade appeared at the guest house door with an unexpected proposition. "There's a swimming hole on Silverhawk property," he said, his hat in his hands. "Fed by a spring so the water stays cool even in this heat. I thought you might like to visit it." Willa hesitated. A swimming hole sounded heavenly in the oppressive heat, but the propriety of such an outing concerned her. Reading her expression, Wade quickly added, "Mrs. Caldwell packed a picnic. She'll be joining us, along with Tommy and a couple of the ranch hands' wives." It's something of a Silverhawk tradition on hot Sundays. Relief and anticipation mingled in Willa's response. "That sounds wonderful. I haven't been swimming since I was a girl in Massachusetts." The swimming hole proved to be a small paradise, a deep, clear pool surrounded by cottonwood trees that offered blessed shade. True to Wade's word, a small group had already gathered, spreading blankets and unpacking food. Mrs. Caldwell waved from her spot beneath the largest tree. "Come join us, dear. And don't worry about swimming clothes, we're informal here. The ladies use that stand of willows to change behind." Willa soon found herself wading into the blissfully cool water in a simple bathing costume lent to her by one of the ranch hands' wives. The sensation of weightlessness after weeks of hard work was divine, and she floated contentedly, letting the water wash away the heat and dust. Opening her eyes, she spotted Wade swimming with powerful strokes across the pond. He moved with the same quiet confidence he displayed on horseback, at home in the water as he was on land. As if sensing her attention, he paused, treading water as he looked in her direction. For a moment, their gazes held across the rippling surface. Willa felt a sudden awareness that had nothing to do with the heat or the water, an awareness of Wade not just as her rescuer or benefactor, but as a man. The moment broke when Tommy executed a spectacular dive from a rocky outcropping, sending waves across the pond. Laughter erupted from the group on shore, and Wade swam toward the commotion, leaving Willa to ponder the unfamiliar flutter in her chest. Later, as they shared Mrs. Caldwell's picnic in the dappled shade, Willa found herself seated beside Wade on a blanket. Their conversation flowed more easily than usual, perhaps loosened by the relaxed atmosphere. "Have you given any thought to what you'll do about your land?" Wade asked, passing her a slice of apple pie. Willa sighed. "I've been considering selling it. The bank won't lend me enough to rebuild properly, and with winter coming eventually." "Winter in Del Rio is milder than what you're used to in Boston," Wade pointed out, "but I understand your thinking." He hesitated, then added, "There might be another option, though." "Oh." Willa looked at him curiously. "Silverhawk has a sawmill. We cut timber for our own use and sell the excess. If you wanted to rebuild, I could arrange for materials at cost. And labor." He shrugged. "Ranch hands are always looking for extra work on their days off." Willa stared at him, overwhelmed by the offer. "I couldn't possibly accept such charity." "Not charity," Wade corrected firmly. "You'd pay for the lumber just at a fair price without middlemen, and you'd pay the men for their work. It would simply be a community effort." The idea was tempting. Despite her growing contentment at Silverhawk, Willa still dreamed of having a place truly her own. Yet the prospect of leaving the ranch and its foreman created an unexpected ache. "I'll think about it," she promised. As August gave way to September, the heat relented somewhat, and Willa's savings grew. She had nearly enough to consider Wade's rebuilding proposal, yet found herself strangely reluctant to mention it again. Life at Silverhawk had fallen into a comfortable pattern. Evenings often found her and Wade sharing simple suppers in the guest house, or on its small porch, talking about their days or sometimes just enjoying companionable silence. On Sundays, they would ride out to different parts of the sprawling ranch, Wade pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the land's history. It was during one such ride that Wade first took her to see his own property, 200 acres of rolling grassland with a small creek running through it. His cabin was modest but sturdy, built with his own hands from Silverhawk timber. "It's beautiful," Willa said sincerely as they sat on his porch, sipping lemonade Wade had stored in a spring house beside the creek. "Why do you spend so much time at Silverhawk when you have this lovely home?" Wade leaned back in his chair, contemplating the horizon. "Duty, mostly. Frederick Jameson pays me well to manage his ranch, and that responsibility doesn't end at sundown." He glanced at her. "But lately, I've found myself thinking about this place more. About what it could be with the right additions." There was something in his tone that made Willa's pulse quicken. "Additions, a proper garden," he said, gesturing to a sunny patch near the cabin. "Maybe some fruit trees, a bigger porch." His eyes met hers. "A woman's touch." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Willa found herself unable to look away from his steady gaze, her mind racing with possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching riders. Wade stood, his expression shifting to alert concern. "I'm not expecting anyone," he said quietly. Two men appeared over the rise, riding hard toward the cabin. Willa recognized Tommy from Silverhawk, his young face tight with urgency. The other was a ranch hand named Mr. Quinnell. Tommy called as they approached. "Fire at the north pasture. Mr. Jameson's prize bulls are up there." Wade's response was immediate. "Saddle my horse," he commanded, already moving toward the stable behind his cabin. To Willa, he said, "I have to go. Tommy can escort you back to Silverhawk." "I'm coming with you," Willa said firmly, rising from her chair. Wade paused, clearly about to refuse, but something in her expression changed his mind. "Stay close to Tommy," was all he said. Minutes later, they were galloping toward a plume of smoke rising in the distance. As they crested a hill, Willa gasped at the sight below. A wall of flame advanced across the dry grassland, driven by a capricious wind toward where a herd of cattle milled in confusion, hemmed in by a bend in the creek. Wade shouted orders to the men who had already gathered, organizing them into teams. Some began setting backfires to create fire breaks, while others worked to guide the cattle toward safety. "Willa, stay here with Tommy," Wade instructed as he prepared to join the men closest to the flames. But fate intervened before Willa could respond. A sudden shift in the wind sent flames racing in a new direction directly toward a small line shack where two young ranch hands were frantically trying to save supplies. In moments, the structure was surrounded, the men trapped inside. Without hesitation, Wade spurred his horse toward the danger. Willa watched in horror as he disappeared into the smoke, memories of her own burning cabin flashing through her mind. Long minutes passed, the crackle of flames and shouts of men creating a chaotic backdrop to Willa's mounting fear. Then, through the billowing smoke, 3 figures emerged, Wade leading his horse, which carried both young ranch hands. Relief flooded through Willa, only to turn to fresh alarm as she saw Wade stumble and fall to one knee. Tommy was already racing toward him, and Willa followed, her heart in her throat. "It's nothing," Wade insisted as they reached him, though the angry red burn on his forearm clearly contradicted his words. "Just caught my sleeve on a burning timber." "It's not nothing," Willa contradicted, examining the injury with gentle fingers. "You need this treated properly." The fire was eventually contained, the precious bulls saved, though the line shack and a significant portion of grazing land were lost. By the time they returned to Silverhawk, night had fallen, and Wade's injury had clearly begun to pain him, though he made no complaint. In the guest house, Willa insisted on treating his burn herself. Mrs. Caldwell provided supplies: clean bandages, a jar of honey, and a poultice of herbs known for healing. "I know what I'm doing," Willa assured Wade when he suggested the ranch doctor should be called. "My mother taught me. She nursed during the war." Wade sat at the small kitchen table while Willa carefully cleaned and treated the burn. Her touch was gentle but confident, and despite the pain, Wade found himself captivated by her concentrated expression. "You could have been killed today," Willa said quietly as she applied the honey to his damaged skin. "Those boys would have died if I hadn't gone in," Wade replied simply. Willa's hand stilled and she looked up to meet his gaze. "I know. It was brave and right. But it doesn't change how terrified I was, watching you disappear into that smoke." Something shifted in Wade's expression, a softening, a revelation. "You were worried for me." "Of course I was worried." The words burst from her with unexpected emotion. "I've already lost everything once to fire." The thought of losing. She stopped, suddenly aware of how much she was revealing. "Losing what, Willa?" Wade's voice was low, intent. Her eyes dropped to his injured arm, focusing on the task of bandaging. "Losing you," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've become important to me, Wade. More important than I realized until I saw you in danger today." Wade's uninjured hand came up to catch hers, stilling her movements. When she met his eyes again, the emotion she saw there made her breath catch. "I've been telling myself it was too soon," he said. "That you needed time to establish yourself here, that you might still decide to rebuild and move back to your own place. I've been making excuses because I was afraid you might not feel the same way." "Feel what way?" Willa asked, though her racing heart already knew the answer. "Like my life has changed irrevocably since the day I found you in that burning cabin." Wade's thumb traced circles on her wrist. "Like everything before was just preparation for knowing you." Willa's free hand came up to touch his face, fingers trailing along his jawline. "I was thinking about rebuilding," she confessed. "But recently, I've been wondering if home might not be a place but a person." The kiss that followed was gentle, mindful of Wade's injury but filled with promise. When they separated, both were breathing unevenly, eyes wide with the significance of what had just transpired. "I should probably tell you," Wade said, a smile lifting the corners of his mouth, "that I've been in love with you since the day you insisted on accompanying me to that pasture fire, despite my objections." Willa laughed softly. "And I should tell you that I've been in love with you since you offered to help me rebuild a home, even though it would have meant watching me leave Silverhawk." Wade stood, drawing her into his arms with his good arm. "About that rebuilding," he murmured against her hair. "My cabin could use expanding. It's good land with plenty of room for horses, maybe cattle of our own someday. Room for a family if that's something you might want." Willa leaned back to look into his face, reading the question there. "Wade Quinnell, are you proposing marriage to me?" Inelegantly, but yes. His expression turned serious. "I know it hasn't been long, but out here, life moves differently than in Boston. When you know something's right, there's little sense in waiting." Willa thought of her original plans when coming to Texas independence, a fresh start, building something of her own. She had never imagined finding a partner, someone whose strength complemented her own. "Yes," she said simply, her heart full. "Yes, I'll marry you." The October wedding took place on Silverhawk's grounds, beneath the same cottonwood trees that shaded the swimming hole. Mrs. Caldwell outdid herself with the preparations, and Mrs. Sullivan closed the mercantile for the day so that all of Del Rio could attend. Frederick Jameson himself traveled from Austin for the occasion, a robust man in his 60s who boisterously approved of his foreman's choice of bride. "About time Wade found himself some happiness," he declared during the feast that followed the ceremony. "Been trying to get him to take a wife for years. Figured it would take someone special to break through that reserve of his." Willa, resplendent in a cream-colored gown that had once belonged to Mrs. Jameson, smiled at her new husband across the table. "It took someone special to make me realize what I really wanted, too." As twilight descended, the couple slipped away from the celebration, mounting horses decked with ribbons and flowers. They rode not to Silverhawk's guest house, but to Wade's cabin, now their cabin where they would begin their life together. The next morning, Wade surprised Willa by presenting her with a small wooden box. "A wedding gift," he explained as she opened it curiously. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay her mother's silver hairbrush restored, the handle cleaned of soot, new bristles fitted where the old ones had burned away. "How did you?" Willa gasped, lifting the brush reverently. "I took it to the silversmith in San Antonio last month," Wade explained. "Wanted it to be perfect for you." Tears welled in Willa's eyes as she turned the brush over, seeing her mother's initials still clear in the silver back. "It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." Wade took the brush from her hands, gently turning her so he could run it through her loose dark hair. "I thought about what you said that day at your burned cabin, that this was something to build on. It seemed fitting for our new beginning." In that moment, with the morning sun streaming through the cabin windows and her husband's gentle hands in her hair, Willa knew with absolute certainty that the fire that had seemed like an ending had actually been the first spark of something far more precious than anything she had lost. The autumn and winter of 1875 passed in a blur of joy for the newlyweds. Willa continued working at Sullivan's Mercantile 3 days a week, using her earnings to help transform their cabin into a true home. Wade remained foreman at Silverhawk, but spent more time developing their own property. By spring of 1876, they had expanded the cabin to include a proper kitchen and second bedroom. Wade built furniture for their growing home in the evenings, revealing a talent for woodworking that surprised and delighted Willa. The garden she planted flourished under her care, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for their porch. "I never imagined being so content with a simple life," Willa confessed one evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in spectacular colors. In Boston, success meant social standing and fine things. Here, it means a good harvest and healthy horses. Wade's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Are you ever sorry you left civilization behind?" Willa turned to study his face, still sometimes amazed by the depth of feeling she saw there when he looked at her. "Never," she said firmly. "This is where I belong." Their first challenge as a married couple came in late summer when Frederick Jameson announced his intention to sell Silverhawk Ranch. "My daughter wants me to move to Philadelphia to be near my grandchildren," he explained to Wade and Willa over dinner at the main house. "Can't say I'm eager to leave Texas, but time marches on." Wade took the news stoically, but Willa could sense his concern. Silverhawk had been his home and livelihood for nearly a decade. A new owner might bring changes that would affect not only Wade's position, but also the lives of all who worked there. "Any prospective buyers yet?" Wade asked. Jameson sighed. "Several interested parties. One outfit from Chicago wants to convert most of it to farmland. Another investor is talking about dividing it into smaller parcels for settlement." He shook his head sadly. "Hate to see it broken up that way." That night, lying awake beside her sleeping husband, Willa's mind raced with possibilities. Their own land was doing well. They had increased their small herd of horses and added a few cattle, but it wasn't enough to support them fully without Wade's position at Silverhawk. An idea began to form, audacious but not impossible. The next morning, Willa rode into Del Rio alone, heading not for the mercantile but for the bank. 2 weeks later, she and Wade sat across from Frederick Jameson in his study, a proposal laid out between them. A partnership. Jameson repeated, eyebrows raised as he studied the documents Willa had prepared. "Yes, sir," Willa confirmed. "Wade and I would purchase a 20% interest in Silverhawk now, with options to increase our ownership over the next 5 years. You would retain controlling interest but be free to relocate to Philadelphia with profits sent to you quarterly." Jameson looked at Wade. "This your idea, son?" Wade shook his head, a proud smile touching his lips. "All Willa's doing, sir. My wife has quite a head for business." "So I see." Jameson picked up the proposal again, reading through the carefully calculated figures. "And the funds for the initial investment, my savings from the mercantile, combined with proceeds from our horse sales," Willa explained. "And we've secured a loan from the bank, using our land as collateral." Jameson's bushy eyebrows shot up again. "Hutchins at the bank approved this, for a woman, for us," Wade corrected firmly. "As equal partners." The older man studied them both for a long moment, then chuckled. "Well, I'll be damned. When you pulled this young lady from that burning cabin last year, Wade, you had no idea what you were really rescuing, did you?" Before Wade could respond, Jameson slapped the table decisively. "I like it. Keeps Silverhawk whole, keeps you in charge of daily operations, and lets me see my grandchildren without worrying about this place falling to ruin or being carved up by speculators." Relief and excitement flowed through Willa as she and Wade exchanged glances. Their gamble had paid off. They were now part owners of one of the finest ranches in the county. As they rode home that evening, Wade reached across to take Willa's hand. "You continue to amaze me," he said. "When I married you, I thought I was rescuing a woman from a difficult situation. Turns out, you've done more rescuing than I ever could." Willa squeezed his hand. "We rescue each other, I think. That's what partnership means." The following spring brought another change to their lives when Willa discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled Wade with equal parts joy and concern, his protective instincts shifting into overdrive. "You should stop working at the mercantile," he insisted one evening as they discussed the future. "And riding to Silverhawk every day can't be good for you or the baby." Willa, who had anticipated this reaction, patted his hand reassuringly. "Mrs. Sullivan has already offered to reduce my hours, and I've accepted. As for Silverhawk, I'll use the buggy instead of riding horseback. But I won't be confined to our home for the next 6 months, Wade." There's too much to do with our new partnership." Wade recognized the determination in her tone and wisely conceded the point. Instead of arguing, he channeled his energy into preparing for the baby's arrival, adding a nursery to their growing home and crafting a cradle from oak harvested on their land. On a stormy night in October 1877, exactly 2 years after their wedding, Willa gave birth to a son they named James Frederick Quinnell. Mrs. Caldwell, who had assisted with the delivery, pronounced him the finest baby she'd seen in 30 years of birthing. Wade, holding his son for the first time, was overcome with emotion. "He has your eyes," he whispered to Willa, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "And your chin," she replied, reaching up to touch Wade's face. "Strong and stubborn." James proved to be a good-natured baby, fitting seamlessly into their busy lives. Willa would often bring him to Silverhawk's main house, where Mrs. Caldwell doted on him shamelessly while Willa attended to business matters. On days she worked at the mercantile, Wade would sometimes appear at midday, the baby secured against his chest in a sling of Willa's design, proudly showing off his son to anyone who would look. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Patterson remarked to Mrs. Sullivan after witnessing this phenomenon. Wade Quinnell, who once went 6 months without speaking more than 10 words to anyone, now can't stop talking about his boy's newest accomplishment. As James grew from infant to toddler, the partnership with Frederick Jameson flourished. Under Wade and Willa's management, Silverhawk expanded its operations, adding more cattle and improving its breeding stock. Their quarterly reports to Jameson in Philadelphia were met with enthusiastic approval, and by 1880 they had increased their ownership stake to 40%. Their personal holdings prospered as well. Wade's talent with horses had resulted in a reputation for breeding some of the finest stock in the region. Willa, meanwhile, had used her business acumen to establish a small but profitable venture selling handcrafted leather goods made by several of the ranch wives. The spring of 1882 brought both joy and challenge. Willa was expecting their second child. James was an energetic 4-year-old full of curiosity, and an unusually wet winter had left much of their land soggy and difficult to work. Then came the letter from Philadelphia that would once again change the course of their lives. Frederick Jameson had suffered a stroke and wished to sell his remaining interest in Silverhawk. "He's offering it to us first," Wade told Willa as they sat on their porch, the letter in his hand. "But even with all we've saved, we're short by nearly half the asking price." Willa, her hand resting on her growing belly, considered the problem. "What about taking on another partner? Someone who shares our vision for Silverhawk?" Wade shook his head. "Finding the right partner would be difficult. Most investors want quick returns, not long-term stewardship." They discussed various possibilities over the next days, weighing options against risks. It was during one such conversation, as they walked along the creek that bordered their property, that an unexpected solution presented itself. "Mr. and Mrs. Quinnell." A voice called from the direction of their cabin. They turned to see Tommy, now a young man of 23 and Silverhawk's assistant foreman, riding toward them with unusual haste. "Fire in town," he shouted as he approached. "Sullivan's Mercantile and half the buildings on that block." Willa's hand flew to her mouth. "Mrs. Sullivan, is she alive but injured?" Tommy confirmed grimly. "They've taken her to Doc Wilson's. Sheriff sent me to fetch you, Mrs. Quinnell. Said you'd want to know right away." Without hesitation, Wade helped Willa onto Tommy's horse, then mounted his own. "Stay with Grandma Caldwell," he instructed James, who had followed them from the cabin, curious about the commotion. The ride to Del Rio revealed a scene of chaos. Half of Main Street was engulfed in flames or smoldering ruins. Men formed bucket brigades from the nearby river, while women tended to the injured and sheltered those who had lost homes. At Doc Wilson's crowded surgery, they found Mrs. Sullivan, her right arm bandaged and her face blackened with soot. "Willa, thank God," the older woman exclaimed when she saw them. "I was hoping they'd find you." "What happened?" Willa asked, taking her former employer's good hand. "Oil lamp fell during a delivery, Mrs. Sullivan explained wearily. "Spread so fast there was barely time to get out. The whole store is gone, along with everything in it." The parallel to Willa's own experience 7 years earlier was not lost on any of them. "I'm just grateful you survived," Willa said firmly. Mrs. Sullivan's expression tightened. "Survived, yes, but with what? Insurance will cover barely half the stock. At my age, starting over seems impossible." That evening, as Willa and Wade finally returned home, exhausted from helping with fire relief efforts, a solution to their dual problems began to take shape in Willa's mind. "What if," she proposed as they sat at their kitchen table, mugs of coffee before them, "we offered Mrs. Sullivan a place at Silverhawk?" Wade looked up, curiosity in his tired eyes. "What do you mean?" "She has insurance money coming. Not enough to rebuild the mercantile, but perhaps enough to invest in a partnership share of Silverhawk. She knows retail and supply chains, which would complement our ranching knowledge. And there's that unused building near the main house that could be converted into a small store to serve the ranch and surrounding properties." Wade considered this, turning the idea over in his mind. "You think she'd be interested?" "I think she needs a new start, just as I did once." Willer reached across the table to take his hand. "And I think we could offer her one while solving our own problem at the same time." 2 weeks later, the three of them sat in what had once been Frederick Jameson's study, now the administrative heart of Silverhawk Ranch and Mercantile. Papers were signed, handshakes exchanged, and a new chapter began. By the time Willa gave birth to their daughter, Elizabeth Martha Quinnell, in July 1882, Silverhawk had transformed. The unused building had indeed become a well-stocked store under Mrs. Sullivan's expert management. Ranch hands no longer needed to travel to Del Rio for supplies, and neighboring ranchers increasingly made Silverhawk their first stop for goods. The partnership proved more successful than any of them had anticipated. Mrs. Sullivan, freed from the physical demands of running a store alone, flourished in her new role as merchandise manager for the growing enterprise. Her connections with suppliers across Texas and beyond brought quality goods at favorable prices, increasing Silverhawk's reputation as a fair place to do business. Wade, meanwhile, continued to oversee the ranching operations with the same quiet competence that had first earned Jameson's trust. Now, however, he did so as majority owner alongside Willa, their dream of full ownership realized through unexpected circumstances. Life was not without its challenges. The winter of 1884 brought record cold that threatened their cattle herds. The following summer saw drought conditions that tested their water management skills. Through it all, Wade and Willa faced each obstacle as they had from the beginning together, with determination and mutual respect. By 1885, a decade after their first meeting, Silverhawk had become one of the most prosperous ranches in South Texas. Their household had expanded to include a third child, Robert Wade Quinnell, born in the spring of 1884. Their original cabin, now expanded into a comfortable family home, sat at the heart of what locals had begun calling Quinnell Land. Their original 200 acres, plus adjacent parcels acquired over the years. Though they spent much of their time at Silverhawk's main ranch house, The cabin remained their true home, the place where their life together had begun. On the 10th anniversary of the fire that had nearly claimed Willa's life, Wade surprised her with a special gift, a daguerreotype of their family, professionally taken in San Antonio during a rare trip to the city. 10 years ago today, I happened to see smoke on the horizon, Wade said as Willa unwrapped the framed image. I had no idea my life was about to change forever. Willa studied the photograph, Wade standing tall and confident, herself seated with baby Robert on her lap, James and Elizabeth flanking them on either side. Behind them stood Mrs. Caldwell and Mrs. Sullivan, now as much family as employees. From the ashes of my little cabin came all of this, Willa marveled, her eyes meeting Wade's. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been riding by that day. Wade's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a gesture that still sent warmth through her after all these years. I believe we would have found each other somehow, he said with quiet certainty. Some things are meant to be, Willa. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset while their children played in the yard, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate young woman trapped in a burning cabin to the confident ranch owner and mother she had become. From the solitary foreman who had kicked down her door to the devoted husband and father at her side. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Willa smiled, leaning into his embrace. "About how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best." Wade's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I thank God every day for guiding me to your cabin that afternoon. And I thank God you were brave enough to walk through fire for a stranger," Willa replied softly. As darkness settled over the Texas landscape, they both loved. Willa knew with absolute certainty that the flames that had nearly taken her life had instead forged something unbreakable, a love tempered by challenges, strengthened by shared purpose, and destined to burn bright for all their days to come. From the ashes of destruction had risen a life more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. Proof that sometimes the most devastating fires can lead to the most extraordinary new beginnings.